Daniel Whitaker, 42. A white American man with a reputation for never missing a closing could not have looked more out of place on the pitted green bench by the swings. His wool coat lay folded beside him like an extra skin he didn't want to wear. The late afternoon sun slanted across Riverside Park, catching dust motes and the long arcs of the empty swings as the wind nudged them back and forth like a lullaby for ghosts. He came here almost every day now. Not because the park offered comfort. Comfort had started to feel like a foreign country, but because the bench gave him a fixed point. In a life once charted by calendars, flights and closings, he needed at least one landmark that didn't move. The bench had been that landmark for 6 months. He listened for the sound that used to split him in two children's laughter, and was mildly surprised when it didn't arrive like a blade. Some days it still did. Other days, like this one, the playground was nearly deserted. One stroller sleeping under a knit blanket, a couple passing a thermos, the river churning beyond the trees. He suspected the quiet wasn't mercy so much as timing. He took it anyway. "Do you remember the list?" Danny Emily's voice, crisp light, certain spoke the way it had when she'd stood at the refrigerator with a dry erase marker and a smile making plans with the faith of a builder. Saturday markets. Adoption orientation. Names we love. The list belonged to a winter before everything got clinical, and then terminal before infertility turned into rehearsed jokes, and then into a hush. Neither of them knew how to break. Before she died. "I remember," he said aloud, and let the wind take it. He allowed himself the old habit of answering her. It steadied him, like stepping on a stair in the dark, and finding it where it ought to be. He had not told anyone that he still heard Emily. People had already filed him into a mental ledger widower. Successful. Coping. Daniel owned a development firm with a name that sounded like a trust fund and a row of awards on a walnut shelf. The papers liked to say he shaped skylines. Lately, he could not shape his mornings. The mansion in the Heights stone facade, copper gutters, a kitchen bigger than his first apartment, had shrunk to a single echoing hallway between his bed and the shower, then the shower and the door. He stayed out as long as possible to delay the pain of coming home. "Love makes a family, not blood," Emily would say when a new test returned with a red stamp that might as well have been branded into his chest. "We'll find our way." He had believed her then, because it was impossible not to. Emily believed in things with both hands. She believed in adoption, birthday pie for breakfast, and writing thank you notes on real paper. She thought he would be a good father. That last belief had been the cruelest gift. It kept breathing after she could not. He pressed his thumbs along the edge of the bench, feeling the old paint layer upon layer flake beneath his nail. Across the path, a child's abandoned plastic shovel lay half buried in the thin March snow, like a flagged idea. He ached unexpectedly for the attention required to notice the way parents were forced to catalog the world's spade, pebble, puddle, snack nap, meltdown miracle. If grief had taught him anything, he wanted the cataloging. He wanted the interruptions. He wanted a life loud enough to drown out the silence. A cyclist coasted by his bell, soft as a question. Daniel checked his watch for no reason, then pocketed his hands against the cold. The lawyer had told him he was a prime candidate for adoption when he'd finally tentatively asked. Prime candidate. The phrase made him think of fruit at a market tested for ripeness. He pictured inspectors pressing their thumbs into his life, searching for soft spots. The truth was unmarketable and straightforward. He was lonely. Not the bristling, defensive loneliness he'd worn in college, when ambition was cheaper than rent, but the clean, hollow kind that settles after a funeral and refuses to leave. "You could still do it," Emily said, as if they were standing in the kitchen again. "You could still choose someone." "I don't know how to choose without you," he answered. And this time, The breeze recorded him little puffs of fog on the air. He tried to remember what it felt like to want things without thinking about what they might cost. As a younger man, he had measured success in square footage and numbers with commas. Emily had recalibrated him. The best nights were when they forgot the time and burned the garlic bread sitting on the floor to eat the good part with their fingers. The best morning was when they thought a test had finally changed color. They had laughed like conspirators. It hadn't. And then time turned into charts and disappointments, and then into hospice brochures, folded neatly on a side table. Through all of it, Emily kept making smaller and smaller lists, until the last list was one item long. Find the light. Find the light, he thought, and looked up as the clouds slid, revealing a square of winter's sun that warmed nothing and still looked like a promise. He imagined Emily in that sun tilting her head and appraising him. You come here, Daniel, but you don't reach for anything. You come to sit with the ache. She had never been unkind, but she also never left a truth unspoken. What else is there to sit with? He asked, and hated how petulant he sounded, like a teenager dragging his feet. She didn't answer, maybe because she wouldn't have. Maybe because on some level he knew the answer himself. He was afraid of starting something he might have to lose. He had lost too much too quickly. Desire felt dangerous, a lever that might open a chute he couldn't climb back up. A pair of sparrows pecked near his shoes, arguing over a crumb. Daniel broke the edge of the stale pretzel he'd bought out of habit at the kiosk and scattered it a small, ridiculous kindness that made him feel marginally more human. The sparrows hopped closer, unimpressed by his existential considerations and entirely concerned with bread. He smiled, despite himself. The mussels remembered how. On the path, a city bus hissed at the curb and groaned away. He watched a girl no older than high school run along the fence in bright sneakers, breath-visible hair flaring behind her. She laughed into her phone as she passed. The sound wasn't a blade this time. It was a note in a song he didn't know the words to yet. You're allowed, Emily said, gentler now. You're allowed to live. I know. He said it like people say I'm fine when they are not. But he did know. Knowing and wanting were different species. Wanting requires courage. He stood, paced 3 steps, sat again. If anyone he knew had seen him, Daniel Whitaker of Whitaker and Thorne. Development, rocking back and forth on a public bench like a man trying to rattle a coin from a vending machine, they would have politely pretended not to. He had built towers that made people crane their necks on sidewalks. He could not apparently lift himself an inch out of a routine that had become a ritual of absence. And yet, the day did not feel like the others. Maybe it was the fragile sunlight. Perhaps he had finally called the adoption attorney back that morning and left a message that said in its entirety, I'm ready to talk. Maybe it was nothing more than the sparrows, the pretzel, and the steadying rhythm of the river. He thought of the list again. Emily's neat handwriting, the way she dotted her I's like tiny moons. Names we love. He whispered 2 of them, half prayer, half dare, and felt a pulse under his ribs that wasn't panic. A gust shivered the swings, and with it came the sound he had braced for children. A small group spilled from the path, puffy coats, lopsided backpacks, the clatter of plastic zippers, and delighted shrieks. Daniel's chest tightened, then loosened, surprised at the looseness. It didn't shatter him. A boy in a red hat climbed the ladder, wrong-footed, and slid down sideways triumphant. A girl decided the lowest branch of the sycamore was a kingdom. A toddler in a snowsuit toddled like a moonwalker. The living continued to live. The knowledge was simpler than philosophy, and therefore harder to dodge. He rubbed his palms together for heat, and without knowing why, reached across the bench to make room, as if some of him expected the world to take him up, as if a presence were already on its way. He did not know her name yet. He did not know that she would be Naomi Johnson. 8. A bright, gap-toothed black American girl with scuffed shoes and a backpack too big for her shoulders. He did not know that her mother, Angela Johnson, 35, a proud, exhausted black American woman, would question him until his answers were clean, and even then keep a reserve of doubt for safety. He did not know any of that. He only knew the bench, the ache, the thin sun, and the shape of a space beside him that for the first time in a very long time looked less like a wound and more like a place someone might sit. Daniel Whitaker had been staring at the rusted swings for so long that the creak of their chains had become a metronome. He wasn't sure how many minutes had passed since the children had run laughing toward the jungle gym, or how long he had been lost in the hollow rhythm of the park. He was reaching for another crumb of pretzel to scatter to the sparrows when he heard a small, hesitant voice beside him. Excuse me, mister. Can I sit here? My legs hurt." The words startled him, breaking into a solitude with the fragile insistence of a knock on a locked door. He turned and saw her, a thin girl, maybe 8 years old, standing just to the side of the bench. Her braids were tied with ribbons that had long ago lost their brightness. But she had tried. He could see the effort in the careful way they were knotted. A backpack, far too heavy for her slight frame, sagged from her shoulders, and her shoes were splitting at the toes, meant to last only one school year. Daniel blinked at her, surprised that anyone, let alone a child, would approach a man who must have looked as unapproachable as he felt. His first instinct was to check if a parent was nearby, but the path was empty. She waited, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, trying to appear patient, though her eyes carried the stubbornness of fatigue. "Yes," he said, scooting to the side and gesturing. "Please sit down." She dropped onto the bench with a long sigh, which sounded too practiced for someone her age. He noticed the scuffed soles of her shoes dangling well above the ground as she began swinging her feet in slow arcs. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind filled the silence, rattling the last dead leaves against the pavement. "Thank you," she said finally, hugging the straps of her backpack. "I've been walking forever. Mama says the bus costs too much just for me, so I walk home from school every day. It's not too far, but my shoes have holes, and sometimes my feet get sore." She spoke matter-of-factly, like she had explained this before, and knew it would not change. Daniel's chest ached at the words. He had sat through countless boardroom pitches about budgets and profits, each stacked with figures larger than he could absorb. Yet here was a child weighing bus fare against blistered feet, presenting the truth with the calm acceptance of someone already used to disappointment. He cleared his throat gently. "What's your name?" She glanced up at him as if measuring whether he could be trusted with something as crucial as her name. Then she straightened her shoulders. "Naomi. Naomi Johnson. Mama named me after a lady in a book she liked. She said strong names help you grow strong." "That's a wonderful name," Daniel said, surprising himself with the warmth in his voice. "I'm Daniel. It's very lovely to meet you, Naomi." Her lips curved into a small smile, the first hint of unguarded joy he had seen on her tired face. "Nice to meet you too, Mr. Daniel. You smell like the man at church who shakes hands with everybody. Mama says you can tell if someone is kind by how they look at you and smell." Daniel let out a soft laugh, startled by the blunt innocence. "And what do you think?" She studied him with eyes too perceptive for her years. "I think you look lonely, but not mean lonely, just quite lonely." The words cut through him more cleanly than any condolence letter or hushed apology he had received after Emily's funeral. Quite lonely. He had never heard it phrased that way, yet it was exact. Naomi kicked her feet again, ribbons bobbing at the ends of her braids. "Do you have kids?" Daniel froze the question, catching him where he lived most painfully. For months it had been the one thing he could not bear to answer. Yet here, from this stranger child with solemn brown eyes, the question landed not as an accusation, but as curiosity. No, he admitted softly. I always wanted to, though. She tilted her head as if considering this. That's sad? You'd be good at it? You listen. Some grown-ups don't. Her honesty pressed against the walls of his chest until he felt the sting of tears gathering. He looked away toward the swings, forcing himself to keep his composure. Thank you, Naomi. That's very kind of you. They sat for a few moments in silence. Around them, other children shouted from the playground. A boy ran past, dragging a stick along the fence, the scrape echoing. Naomi watched him wistfully, then turned back. She said, I don't get to stay at the park after school. Mama says I have to come straight home and do homework. She works a lot. First at the hotel, then at the diner. She says she's doing it so I can have choices. But sometimes I wish she didn't have to work so much. I miss her. Her words struck Daniel with the sharp weight of memory. Emily at the kitchen table. Her head bent over adoption forms, whispering that choices made life complete. He had thought that dream had died with her, yet here was a child whose entire life was strung together by her mother's sacrifices, speaking with pride and quiet yearning. I'm sure your mother is very proud of you, Daniel said softly. Naomi gave a slight shrug. She says she is. She tells me every night, even when she's tired. But sometimes. She trailed off, staring at the dirt beneath her dangling feet. Sometimes I think she wishes she didn't have to do it alone. Daniel didn't know what to say. He had spent years building towers out of steel and glass, thinking that was a contribution enough. Yet this child spoke of something entirely different, the weight of ordinary survival. He wanted to tell her that no one should do it alone. Instead, he found himself asking a question he hadn't planned. Would it be all right if I sit here again tomorrow, when you walk home? Naomi's eyes brightened, her earlier fatigue dissolving into something lighter. Really? You'd wait for me? I'd like that, he said. Her grin was sudden and radiant, transforming her whole face. Then you won't be so lonely. Perhaps I won't be so tired from walking. That's fair. For the first time in months, Daniel felt something stir in him that wasn't grief. Hope. Not a grand, sweeping kind, but a fragile, almost imperceptible seed. He realized he was looking forward to tomorrow. Naomi shifted her heavy backpack, preparing to leave. I should go now. Mama says I can't be late. Thank you for the seat, Mr. Daniel. He stood, surprising himself by reaching to help her lift the bag onto her shoulders. Same time tomorrow, then? She nodded solemnly, as though sealing a contract at the same time. Daniel watched her small figure walk down the path, her ribbons bouncing with each determined step. And as she disappeared around the corner, he felt an unfamiliar anticipation, the kind that pulled him forward instead of backward. For the first time since Emily's diagnosis, he had something to look forward to. Someone had seen him. Someone had needed him, if only for a bench and a moment. He whispered to the empty air, as though Emily might still be listening. You told me to find the light. Maybe this is it. The swing chains rattled again in the wind, and the sound felt less like mourning, more like a beginning. Daniel returned to the bench the next afternoon earlier than he meant to. His shoes tapped impatient rhythms on the path as he glanced at his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. He told himself it was ridiculous to wait with such anticipation. Children were unpredictable. Maybe Naomi wouldn't come this way today. Maybe her mother had taken a rare afternoon off and picked her up from school. But then he saw the familiar small figure trudging along the sidewalk, her oversized backpack bumping against her spine like a stubborn passenger. She noticed him almost immediately. Her tired walk quickened into a trot, and when she reached him, she beamed as if she had discovered a hidden treasure exactly where she had left it. You came back, she said, slightly breathless. Of course I did, Daniel replied, smiling despite himself. I promised, didn't I? Naomi slid onto the bench beside him, exhaling dramatically. My feet hurt again. One day they're going to walk away without me. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. Your feet are tougher than you realize. But maybe they'd hurt less if those shoes were replaced. She glanced down at them, cracks along the sides, laces frayed. Mama says we'll get new ones when she has extra money. But additional money is like unicorns. I read that unicorns aren't real. Her bluntness made Daniel swallow the lump rising in his throat. He hesitated, wanting to offer help, but knowing instinctively that a child's dignity was as fragile as porcelain. Instead, he shifted the subject. What did you learn in school today? Her face lit up, all fatigue, evaporating in an instant. We learned about butterflies. They start as crawly little caterpillars and then change into something else all beautiful. My teacher called it metamorphosis. Isn't that a big word? It is, Daniel said, impressed by her crisp pronunciation. And it's also a perfect description. Something small changes into something extraordinary. Naomi tilted her head. Can people do that too? Change from one thing to another? Hopefully they can turn into happy, become magical happens. Her words stopped him cold. For months he had felt trapped in his grief, cocooned in sorrow so dense he couldn't imagine anything beyond it. And here was this child, matter-of-factly suggesting that people could undergo their metamorphosis. You might be right, Daniel admitted softly. Sometimes the right moment or the right person can change everything. Satisfied with his answer, Naomi dug into her backpack and pulled a paper folded into quarters. She smoothed it on her lap and held it up for him to see, an uneven but earnest butterfly drawn in bright crayon colors. I made this in art class, she explained. I was going to throw it away, but then I thought you'd like it. Since you sit here alone, you may need something cheerful. Daniel took the paper carefully, as if it were fragile. Thank you, Naomi. This means more than you know. She shrugged with a shy smile. It's just paper. No, he said firmly, tucking it into the inside pocket of his coat. It's a hope on paper. Naomi looked at him for a long moment, then grinned. You say things like my teacher. She's always talking about hope. She says it's like a balloon that lifts you even when the world feels heavy. Daniel's chest tightened. Emily had used that same metaphor once years ago when they'd sat on the floor after another doctor's appointment that brought no good news. Hope is a balloon, Danny. Don't let go. He wondered, not for the first time, whether the universe whispered in circles until someone was ready to listen. Your teacher sounds very wise, and he managed to steady his voice. She is, Naomi agreed. But Mama is wiser. Daniel turned toward her, curious. Tell me about your mother. The child's eyes softened with admiration. Mama works so hard. She cleans hotel rooms all day, then goes to wash dishes at night. She says it's so I can have a better life. Sometimes, she's so tired she falls asleep at the table, but she still helps me with my homework. She sings when she cooks, even when she's worn out. And she always tells me she loves me every single day. Daniel listened with reverence, each word painting a portrait of a woman he had never met, but already respected. He thought about his own cavernous house, silent and dark most nights, and the warmth described by Naomi seemed more valuable than all his square footage. You're fortunate, he said quietly. I know, Naomi replied. Then she added with a slight frown. But sometimes I wish she didn't have to work so much. Sometimes I want her to sit on the couch with me and not fall asleep immediately. Her honesty pierced him. Daniel wanted to fix its shoulder some invisible burden and promise this child a world where her mother didn't collapse from exhaustion every night. But promises were dangerous. He had learned that the hard way. So he said, I'm sure your mother wishes the same. Naomi gave a slight nod. She then shifted topics the way children do, suddenly and fluidly. Do you ever come here to watch the kids play? Yes. Daniel admitted, his eyes moving to the swings and slides. It reminds me of something I always wanted. Kids, she asked gently. Yes. Naomi studied him with eyes that seemed to understand more than her years allowed. You'd be good at it, she said again. Being a dad, I mean. You listen. You notice things. Daniel's throat tightened, and he cleared it quickly. That's for you to say. She leaned back on the bench, swinging her legs idly. You can practice on me just for sitting here. I don't have many friends who stop to listen. His heart twisted. The idea of practicing fatherhood on a child who clearly craved connection made him both hopeful and afraid. Afraid because he could already feel himself caring. Afraid because attachment once formed was not easily undone. Still, he nodded. I'd like that very much. Naomi beamed, then stood abruptly, hoisting her backpack. I have to go. Mama worries if I'm late. But, same time tomorrow. Yes, Daniel said. She grinned, then trotted down the path, her ribbons bouncing. Daniel watched until she disappeared around the bend, the silence returning like a tide. Yet it wasn't the same silence as before. It was lighter, threaded with possibility. He looked down at the folded paper in his coat pocket, the childish butterfly radiating color in his mind. He didn't dread the hours until tomorrow for the first time in months. He was already counting them. As he rose to leave, he whispered into the evening air, almost as if Emily were still near enough to hear. Maybe this is the balloon. This may be where I begin again. The next afternoon, Daniel arrived at Riverside Park earlier than he'd planned, carrying a small paper bag from the gourmet grocery store downtown. Inside were carefully chosen items, a box of trail mix with dried fruit almonds, and a scattering of chocolate pieces, plus a chilled bottle of spring water. He had spent part of the morning reading articles online about healthy snacks for children, something he had never researched. The fact that he now knew about fiber content and energy-boosting ingredients amused him almost as much as it unsettled him. He was preparing for a child who wasn't his, yet every instinct told him it mattered. The bench was waiting empty and familiar. Daniel sat, fidgeted, stood, paced, then sat again. He felt strangely nervous, like he was waiting for an interview with fate. Every sound along the path drew his attention. When he finally saw Naomi approaching, his heart gave a surprising leap. She walked slower than usual, the heavy backpack bending her posture. He noticed the wear in her shoes more clearly this time. Frayed seams, rubber soles curling upward. Mr. Daniel, she called, spotting him. Her face lit with a smile that pushed her fatigue aside momentarily. Naomi, he said warmly, standing as she reached the bench. I've been looking forward to this. She collapsed onto the bench with a sigh, letting her backpack slide off her shoulders. My feet hurt again. We had gym class today and I had to run laps. I'm not a fast runner. Running on tired shoes would make anyone slow, Daniel said gently. He reached into the paper bag, pulling out the small container of trail mix. I brought you something for the walk home. I hope that's all right. Her eyes widened. For me? Really, really, Daniel said, placing the container in her hands. It's just a snack, nothing fancy, but it might give you extra energy. Naomi turned the box over in her hands, studying it as though it might vanish. Mama says we shouldn't take things from people unless we can give something back. Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady. You already gave me something yesterday. You gave me your drawing and your friendship. That's worth far more than a snack. She considered this, brow furrowed in concentration. Then she nodded, accepting the logic. That makes sense. Mama says friendship is the best thing you can give someone. Thank you, Mr. Daniel. She opened the box carefully, selecting a piece of dried fruit and placing it on her tongue like a rare delicacy. Her slight smile widened, and Daniel felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the sun. "What did you learn in school today?" he asked, eager to keep the light in her eyes. "We learned more about butterflies," she said eagerly. "Our teacher said they start as something plain and turn into something beautiful. I told Tommy Henderson that people could do that too. Sad people can change into happy people if something magical happens." Daniel felt the truth of her words land heavily inside him. "That's a wise thought, Naomi. You might be right." She munched thoughtfully, swinging her legs. "Do you know about butterflies too?" "Yes," Daniel replied. "And I agree with your teacher. Sometimes the most beautiful things come from unexpected changes." Naomi nodded, satisfied, then reached for another bite of trail mix. "Mama says I have an old soul. She says I think about big things, even though I'm little." Daniel smiled softly. "Your mama is right. You do think about big things." They sat together for a while, Naomi eating slowly, Daniel asking questions about her favorite subjects. She told him she loved reading, especially books with brave girls who solved mysteries. She liked math too, but hated spelling tests. He listened intently as he used to listen to Emily, after a long day, cherishing each detail, because it offered a window into someone else's world. At one point, Naomi stopped chewing and looked at him thoughtfully. "Mr. Daniel, why do you sit here every day? Before I talked to you, I saw you sitting here a lot. You always looked so sad." Daniel hesitated, the answer heavy in his throat. He could tell her part of it, he realized. Children respected honesty even in pieces. "I lost someone significant to me. My wife. She was my best friend. When she passed away, I didn't know what to do with myself. So I started coming here to this bench. It became a habit." Naomi's expression softened. "I'm sorry, Mr. Daniel. That must hurt a lot." "It does," he admitted quietly. "But talking to you has made it hurt a little less." She studied him thoughtfully, then reached out and patted his hand with her small one. "I could be your friend. That way, you won't be lonely anymore." The simplicity of her offer nearly undid him. He swallowed hard, blinking against the sting of tears. "I would be honored to be your friend, Naomi." Her smile returned wide and bright. "Good. Because I don't have many friends after school. Most kids go to activities or play dates, but I must go home immediately and do my homework. I could stop and talk for a while if you're here." "That would be nice." "It would," Daniel agreed. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of gold and pink. Naomi gathered her backpack with Daniel's help, her small shoulders sagging under its weight. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked, her tone hopeful. "Yes," Daniel said, standing as she adjusted the straps. "I'll be here." "Okay. Thank you for the snack. And for listening. Mama says listening is one of the most important things friends can do for each other." "She's very wise," Daniel replied. Naomi grinned, then set off down the path, ribbons bouncing. Daniel watched her disappear into the distance, the park growing quieter with each step she took. When he finally sat again, the emptiness of the bench felt different. It no longer symbolized loss, but possibility. For the first time in months, he didn't dread tomorrow. He anticipated it, and that fragile seed of hope, planted by a tired little girl, began to take root in the hollow places of his heart. Saturday afternoon sunlight stretched long across the sidewalks. When Daniel saw Naomi approaching the park, her steps lighter than usual. But this time she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a tall, graceful woman, with the same deep brown eyes as Naomi. Her stride was purposeful, her shoulders squared with the kind of resolve from years of doing everything herself. Naomi's hand clung to hers, the girl practically bouncing excitedly as she pointed toward the bench where Daniel sat waiting. "Mama, that's him. That's Mr. Daniel." The woman's steps slowed immediately, her gaze narrowing as she took in his tailored clothes, polished shoes, and the grocery bag at his side. Daniel could feel the barrier she carried with her even before she spoke, an invisible wall built of caution, exhaustion, and fierce protectiveness. "Wait here for a moment, sweetheart," she said to Naomi, her voice calm but firm. "I want to talk to Mr. Daniel alone first." Naomi obeyed reluctantly, tugging at her mother's hand before letting go. She dropped her backpack by the grass and crouched to pick dandelions, though her eyes stayed fixed on the adults. The woman stepped closer. "You must be Daniel Whitaker." "Yes," he said, rising politely. "And you must be Naomi's mother, Angela Johnson." Her tone was calm, professional, almost businesslike. "My daughter tells me you've been sitting with her after school and bringing her snacks." "I have." "Yes," Daniel admitted, keeping his voice steady. "She walks a long way. A little food and water might help. Nothing more." Angela crossed her arms. "Why?" The single word landed like a test. Daniel straightened, meeting her eyes without flinching, "Because she asked if she could sit beside me one day, and because she reminded me what kindness looks like. Talking to her has been the first good thing in my life in a long time." Angela studied him carefully, searching for cracks in his explanation. Men don't usually spend their afternoons waiting for little girls they don't know. "So I'll ask again. Why?" He could hear the warning beneath her question, the implication that one wrong answer would end this connection before it had truly begun. He took a breath. "Because I lost my wife not long ago. We wanted children, but couldn't have them. When Naomi sat down, she brought light back into a place I thought would stay dark forever. I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm not trying to take anything from her or from you. I care about her." Angela's eyes narrowed slightly, though he saw the flicker of something softer behind them, understanding maybe, or recognition. "That's a lot of weight to put on a child." "I know," Daniel said quickly. "I don't expect her to carry my grief. She doesn't even know most of it. She talks, and I listen. That's all. She makes me feel human again." Angela's arms remained crossed, her body taut with suspicion. "And what do you want from her in return?" "Nothing," Daniel said firmly. "Nothing at all." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sounds of Naomi humming as she gathered flowers. Daniel could feel sweat prickling at the back of his neck, but he refused to look away. Angela's gaze was sharp, the kind of gaze that had seen too many broken promises and disappointments to trust easily. Finally, she said, "Naomi talks about you constantly. Mr. Daniel said this. Mr. Daniel gave me that. Mr. Daniel thinks I'm smart. She's happy, I'll give you that. But it scares me." "Why?" Daniel asked gently. "Because she's getting attached to someone who might disappear." Angela's voice softened, but her words cut all the same. "Because I work too many hours to shield her from every hurt, and I can't afford to let her believe in something that won't last." Daniel's heart ached at the raw honesty. He understood that fear too well. "You're right to worry. She deserves consistency. I can't promise to be perfect, but I can promise I won't walk away. I've already lost too much. I won't choose to lose her." Angela's expression shifted, still cautious, but touched by something else. Weariness, perhaps. Longing. She glanced over her shoulder at Naomi, who was now stringing dandelions together, sneaking anxious glances back at them. "She's all I have," Angela said quietly. "Every choice I make, every hour I work, every sacrifice, it's all for her. I don't date. I don't go out. I don't even buy myself new shoes until hers have been replaced. She comes first." Daniel nodded, respect filling his voice. "She knows. She talks about you with so much pride. You've raised an extraordinary daughter." Angela's arms loosened slightly. For a moment, Daniel caught a glimpse of vulnerability behind the steel exterior, a woman carrying the weight of 2 lives on her shoulders, afraid to trust anyone else with even a piece of it. "What are you really offering here, Mr. Whitaker?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "I don't know yet," Daniel admitted. "Friendship, consistency, more if you'll allow it. I know your daughter matters to me, and you do too, because you're the center of her world." Angela blinked at him, her lips pressing together. It was not acceptance, not yet, but it wasn't rejection either. At that moment, Naomi bounded over, holding up a crooked chain of dandelions. "Look, Mama, I made a necklace for you, and one for Mr. Daniel too." Angela's stern face softened instantly as she bent down to let Naomi slip the flowers over her neck. Then Naomi turned to Daniel, her grin wide, as she looped the second chain around his collar. "Now you match," she declared proudly. Daniel laughed, touched by the simple gesture. Angela glanced at him, and though her guard remained, her eyes lingered a second longer than before. "Thank you, sweetheart," Angela murmured to her daughter. Naomi beamed, slipping her hand into her mother's. "Mama, can Mr. Daniel walk with us part of the way home? Please." Angela hesitated, torn between instinct and her daughter's pleading eyes. Then after a moment, she nodded. "All right, but just to the corner." Naomi cheered and tugged them forward, her small hand linking their steps. Daniel felt the fragile beginnings of something stirring between them as they walked, an unspoken possibility, delicate as the dandelion chain around his neck. Angela Johnson had not welcomed him yet, but she hadn't shut him out either. And for Daniel, that was enough. Enough to hope. Enough to try. Enough to believe that this wasn't the end of his story, but the beginning of a new one. The days followed were slow, deliberate, and filled with fragile beginnings. Daniel continued to meet Naomi at the park each afternoon, and after their cautious first encounter, Angela began allowing it with a measured eye. At first, she lingered at the park corner, pretending to check her phone, while her daughter chattered away on the bench. Later, she allowed Naomi to stay a little longer before hurrying home. And finally, after nearly 2 weeks of careful observation, Angela herself began sitting on the far end of the bench, silent but present. Daniel never pushed, never overstepped. He greeted Angela politely, asked Naomi about her day, and offered snacks. He now kept carefully simple fruit nuts and bottles of water. He avoided anything expensive or showy. He wanted to prove he wasn't trying to buy affection, only to offer care where he could. Oblivious to the delicate dance between adults, Naomi thrived in these afternoons. She talked endlessly about spelling bees, the girl in her class who braided her hair too tightly, and a boy who bragged about video games she didn't own. She described her teacher's lessons in detail, peppered with sharp observations that made Daniel laugh more than once. One afternoon, Naomi arrived breathless and excited, waving a paper over her head. "Guess what Mr. Daniel Mrs. Patterson says? I might skip a grade next year, because I read harder books than the others." Daniel's heart swelled with pride. "That's wonderful, Naomi. You must be very proud." Angela, sitting stiffly nearby, gave the faintest smile. "She works hard. She's always been advanced." Naomi beamed at her mother's words, then plopped down beside Daniel. "Can I be a teacher someday? Or a doctor?" "You can be anything you want," Daniel said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Angela's gaze flickered to him, sharp, but less hostile than before. Something in her expression said, "Don't make promises you can't keep." He understood. But this wasn't a promise made lightly. It was a truth he already believed about Naomi. Over time, Angela's caution began to thaw in small, almost imperceptible ways. She no longer watched Daniel like he might suddenly vanish with her child. She occasionally joined their conversations, correcting Naomi's math problem, or reminding her to tie her shoelaces. Once when Daniel offered Naomi a book he thought she'd enjoy. Angela accepted it first, flipping through the pages with scrutiny, before allowing her daughter to take it. One Friday evening, as the sky blushed orange and pink, Angela surprised Daniel by speaking directly to him after Naomi ran ahead to chase a group of pigeons. "You don't have children of your own, do you?" she asked, her tone steady but not unkind. Daniel hesitated, then answered honestly, "No. My wife and I tried for years. We found out we couldn't. Then she got sick, and she passed away." Angela's face softened slightly, though her voice remained guarded. "I'm sorry. That must have been hard." It was, Daniel admitted. "Still is. But meeting Naomi has reminded me that life can hold something good again." Angela studied him with that same evaluating stare, as if trying to measure the truth of his words. Finally, she looked away, calling to her daughter. "Naomi, time to go." Yet something in her expression lingered in acknowledgement, if not trust, just yet. The following week, Daniel made a decision that felt both natural and terrifying. As Naomi munched happily on a snack of apple slices, he turned to Angela. "I was wondering," he said carefully, "if I could meet you both somewhere outside the park. I suggest taking you to dinner. Nothing extravagant, just a chance to sit and talk. I want to show you that my intentions are good." Angela's brows lifted. For a moment he thought she might laugh outright. "Dinner with you?" "Yes," Daniel said. Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. "I don't accept charity, and I don't let strangers buy me meals." Daniel nodded quickly. "I understand. I don't see it as charity, and I'm not a stranger anymore. Naomi and I are friends, and I'd like to be friends with you too." Angela's lips pressed together, considering. He saw the conflict written across her face, the instinct to shield her daughter colliding with the flicker of curiosity that had begun to grow. "Let me think about it," she said finally. Daniel accepted her answer without pressing further. The breakthrough came a few days later. Naomi had fallen asleep at the bench, worn out from gym class and a heavy backpack. She rested her head against Daniel's side, trusting him completely. Angela returned from the corner where she'd been making a phone call and paused, watching them. For a moment, her usual tension seemed to fade. "You make her feel safe," she said quietly, almost to herself. Daniel looked up, startled by the admission. "She makes me feel alive." Angela studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "All right. Dinner, but somewhere casual. And I pay for myself." Daniel allowed himself a small smile. "Deal." The following Saturday evening, Daniel met them at a modest diner near Angela's apartment. Naomi was ecstatic, chattering the entire walk from the bus stop. On the other hand, Angela was cautious, her posture upright, her eyes scanning the room, as if expecting judgment from every corner. They ordered simple meals, burgers, fries, and a milkshake. Naomi insisted they share. Daniel kept the conversation light, asking about Naomi's favorite books, Angela's classes at night school, and the things they both loved most about their neighborhood. Slowly, almost against her will, Angela began to relax. Halfway through the meal, Naomi leaned across the table, chocolate mustache on her lip. "Mr. Daniel, what do you think? I think you're like my dad already. You care if I'm tired, listen to my stories, and buy me snacks. That's what dads do, right?" Angela froze, her eyes flashing to Daniel. The air grew taut with unspoken tension. Daniel didn't flinch. He looked at Naomi, his voice gentle but steady. "I care about you, yes, very much. But I'm not your dad. I'm your friend. And I'll be here as long as you want me to be." Naomi considered this, then smiled. "That's good enough for me." She slurped the milkshake blissfully, unaware of the storm her words had stirred. Angela's shoulders loosened slightly. She gave Daniel a long, searching look that carried warning and reluctant respect. When they left the diner that night, Naomi skipping ahead on the sidewalk, Angela silently walked beside Daniel. Just before they reached her building, she spoke. "She's all I've got," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "If you hurt her even once, you won't see her again." Daniel met her gaze unflinching. "I understand, and I won't." For the first time, Angela gave a slight nod, not quite approval, but not dismissal. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the first real step toward it. And Daniel, walking back alone through the quiet streets, felt hope blooming again, fragile, uncertain, but undeniably alive. The weeks after the diner meeting began to feel different. The park bench was no longer the only space where Daniel and Naomi spoke. Now their connection extended into the daily rhythm of her family's life. Sometimes Angela would wave Daniel over when she saw him waiting near the corner of their block, inviting him to walk Naomi the rest of the way home. Other days he joined them for a quick sandwich at the kitchen table before Angela left for her evening shift. Something extraordinary began to take shape in these small, ordinary moments. Daniel carried Naomi's heavy backpack one chilly afternoon as she skipped ahead on the sidewalk, pointing at shop windows decorated for the holidays. "Mama says we can't afford decorations this year," she confided, slowing her steps so he could hear. "But I don't care. I'll make paper snowflakes like we did last year. They look nice if you tape them to the windows." "That sounds beautiful," Daniel said, genuinely impressed. "Do you remember how to fold them?" "Of course. I can show you tomorrow if you want." "I'd like that," he replied softly, surprised by how much the idea delighted him. Angela, walking a few steps behind, overheard. "Naomi, don't bother him with crafts. He has a business to run." Naomi frowned, but he said yes. Daniel turned, offering Angela a reassuring smile. "I'd like to see them, honestly. My house could use a few snowflakes." Angela studied him a moment, then gave a reluctant shrug. "Fine. Just don't let her leave glitter all over your clothes. That stuff never comes out." For the first time, there was humor in her voice. Small, cautious, but there. That evening, after Naomi had gone to her room to finish homework, Angela poured herself a cup of tea and leaned against the counter while Daniel waited by the door. "You know," she said, her tone carefully neutral, "I'm still trying to figure out why you're here." Daniel hesitated, then answered plainly, "Because for the first time in months, I want to be. That's all." Angela's eyes narrowed slightly. "People don't usually just want to help without expecting something back, not in my experience." "I understand why you'd feel that way," he replied. "But I don't expect anything. Being around you both gives me something I didn't know I needed." Angela held his gaze a long time, then looked away. "Naomi likes you. Too much, maybe. If you disappear, she'll notice." "I'm not going anywhere," Daniel said, his voice steady. Her lips tightened as though she wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. "We'll see," she muttered, finishing her tea. The following Saturday, Daniel invited them both to the city zoo. He expected Angela to refuse, but to his surprise, she agreed, though only after extracting a promise that the trip wouldn't interfere with her night shift. The zoo was crowded with families, the air filled with the scent of popcorn and children's laughter. Naomi ran from exhibit to exhibit, squealing with delight at penguins, elephants, and monkeys. Daniel trailed after her, camera in hand, capturing every grin and every wide-eyed gasp. Angela watched with arms folded, clearly torn between enjoying the sight of her daughter's happiness and guarding herself from the tenderness creeping into her own expression. Daniel crouched to show Naomi the zoo map at one point, letting her trace their route with a marker. Angela noticed the way he listened attentively, the way he let Naomi lead instead of guiding her. Something in her shoulders softened, though she quickly straightened when Daniel glanced up at her. During lunch at the outdoor cafe, Naomi leaned over her tray of chicken tenders. Mama, can we do this every weekend? Please, Angela chuckled. We can't afford the zoo every week, baby. What if we got a membership? Daniel suggested lightly. It would be cheaper long term. Angela shot him a sharp look. We don't need charity. He met her eyes calmly. It wouldn't be charity. I want to come back with you both because I enjoy it. For a moment, Angela said nothing. Naomi looked between them nervously, sensing the tension. Then Angela sighed. We'll talk about it later. Naomi grinned, satisfied. The more time they spent together, Daniel noticed the cracks in Angela's armor. She worked herself to exhaustion, yet still managed to help Naomi with homework, cook meals, and attend online nursing classes late into the night. She never complained, but Daniel could see the toll it was taking, the way her hands trembled slightly when she held her mug of coffee, the way dark circles under her eyes deepened week by week. One evening, after Naomi had gone to bed, Daniel lingered at the table while Angela sorted bills. The stack was thick, and the frown on her face was deeper than usual. He said quietly that you shouldn't have to do this alone. Angela didn't look up. I've been doing it alone for years. It's nothing new, but it doesn't have to stay that way. She set the papers down sharply. Don't make promises you can't keep. I've heard too many of those. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low but firm. I'm not promising to fix everything. I'm here if you'll let me be. Angela stared at him for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, her expression softened. I don't know what to do with someone who actually means that. Maybe believe it, he suggested. Her eyes glistened for a fraction of a second before quickly looking away. I'll think about it. The turning point came late one night. Daniel stayed later than usual, helping Naomi cut out paper snowflakes at the kitchen table, while Angela studied on her laptop. When Angela finally rose to make coffee, she swayed slightly, gripping the counter for balance. Daniel was beside her in an instant. Angela, are you all right? I'm fine, she muttered, brushing him off. Just tired. But the tremor in her hands told another story. He steadied her gently, meeting her eyes. You don't have to carry all of this alone. For the first time, she didn't argue. Instead, she let herself lean just momentarily into the steadiness he offered. Naomi looked up from her snowflakes, watching silently. She said nothing, but her small, hopeful smile said everything. As Daniel walked home that night, the crisp air filling his lungs, he realized something fundamental had shifted. Angela no longer saw him only as a stranger intruding into her life. She still guarded her heart, but was beginning to allow space for him in their world. It wasn't love yet. It wasn't trusted completely. But it was a fragile bridge spanning the chasm between loneliness and connection. And Daniel, for the first time in years, dared to believe that the bridge might hold. The rhythm of their lives settled into something that resembled a fragile routine. Daniel met Naomi most afternoons in the park, sometimes walking her home with Angela's permission, and sometimes staying for dinner if Angela had a late shift. It wasn't a formal arrangement. Nothing was ever promised, but it grew into a pattern everyone began to rely on. Naomi relied on his steady presence, the way he listened and laughed at her stories. Angela relied on the extra set of eyes when she couldn't be home in time. And Daniel, though he tried not to think about it too deeply, relied on the sense of belonging that came from the simplest moments, setting the table with mismatched plates, carrying Naomi's backpack, or reading aloud from a library book. But with new bonds came the first real test of their strength. It happened on a Wednesday evening. Naomi had been unusually quiet during their walk home, dragging her feet and chewing her lip. When they reached the apartment building, she hesitated at the door. Mr. Daniel, she said softly, do you think my mama works too much? The question caught him off guard. Why do you ask? because sometimes she comes home so tired she can't even smile. And I stay up waiting to ensure she makes it back safe. Last night she didn't come home until almost midnight. I fell asleep on the couch and she carried me to bed. But I worry about her walking home alone in the dark. Daniel's chest tightened. He crouched to meet her eyes. It's not fair that you have to worry like that. But your mama works because she loves you. She wants to give you everything she can. Naomi nodded, though her frown lingered. I wish she didn't always have to be so tired. Later, when Angela arrived home, Daniel stayed behind a moment after Naomi retreated to her room. He hesitated, then said carefully, "She's worried about you." Angela sighed, setting down her purse. I know. She hears more than she should. But what choice do I have? Rent doesn't pay itself. Groceries don't magically appear. And tuition for nursing school doesn't stop just because I'm exhausted. You shouldn't have to do it alone, Daniel said softly. Angela's expression hardened. Don't. We've been through this. I'm not a charity case. I don't need saving. I'm not trying to save you, he replied firmly. I want to help. Her eyes narrowed. And what do you get out of helping? Daniel hesitated, then told the truth. I get to feel useful again. I get to matter to someone. That's all I want. Angela studied him, suspicion battling with something else, something softer. Finally, she looked away. I don't know if I can trust that yet. The tension simmered for days, but the real confrontation came the following weekend. Daniel had offered to pick up groceries on his way over. He thought he was being practical, easing Angela's load. But Angela's expression darkened when he arrived carrying bags filled with fresh produce, bread, and milk. What is this? She demanded. Groceries, Daniel said cautiously. Just a few things you mentioned needing. I didn't ask you for this. I know, he admitted, but it might make things a little easier. Angela set her jaw. How does it look? A man showing up with bags of food for a woman he barely knows. I won't have people thinking I can't care for my family. Daniel felt the sting of her words, but forced himself to stay calm. Angela, I didn't mean to offend you. I just wanted to help. Her eyes flashed. Help is temporary. Charity disappears when the giver gets bored. Then I'm left explaining why someone else had walked away to Naomi. The air between them grew taut, thick with unspoken fears. Naomi, sensing the tension, peeked from her bedroom door. Mama. Mr. Daniel. Angela immediately softened her tone, forcing a smile for her daughter. It's fine, sweetheart. Finish your homework. Naomi retreated, though her eyes lingered with worry. Angela turned back to Daniel, her voice lower now. You can't just step in like this. If you want to be in our lives, you must understand. I can't afford to let Naomi hope for something that won't last. Daniel swallowed hard. Then let me prove I'm not going anywhere. Angela stared at him silent for a long moment. Then she finally said, We'll see. Actions speak louder than words. Daniel ensured his actions were consistent and straightforward for the next week. He stopped bringing gifts or groceries. He focused only on being present, showing up on time, listening, carrying Naomi's backpack, and asking about Angela's classes. He resisted every instinct to do more, understanding that trust would grow only in small steps. And gradually it began to. One evening, Angela returned from her shift to find Naomi and Daniel at the kitchen table, books spread out before them. Naomi was beaming proudly, showing off a finished math assignment. Daniel said she got every answer correct, unable to hide his grin. Angela's eyes flicked between them. Something in her expression softened the wariness, giving way to quiet relief. Thank you, she said. It wasn't a grand gesture, but for Daniel, it meant everything. The real breakthrough came the following Saturday. Angela had just finished folding laundry when Naomi burst into the room holding a flyer. "Mama, look. There's a free science fair at the community center this weekend. Can we go?" Angela frowned. "I have work." "I could take her," Daniel offered gently. Angela's eyes snapped to his suspicion flaring, but Naomi's hopeful gaze tugged at her resolve. "Please, Mama, you trust him, don't you?" The room fell silent. Daniel held his breath, waiting. Finally, Angela exhaled. "All right, but only for a few hours. And you bring her straight home after." "I promise," Daniel said. The science fair was a simple event. Tables filled with student projects, demonstrations of magnets and volcano models. But to Naomi, it was magic. She darted from exhibit to exhibit, tugging Daniel's hand as she explained what she already knew. At one table, she leaned over a microscope and gasped. "You can see tiny things moving. This is amazing." Daniel watched her with a mixture of pride and awe. He hadn't felt this joy since, well before his life had unraveled. On the walk home, Naomi skipped ahead, still buzzing with excitement. Daniel walked beside Angela, who had met them outside the building. Angela admitted that she hasn't stopped talking about it since you left, a small smile tugging at her lips. Daniel glanced at her. "Thank you for trusting me." Angela's expression softened, though her eyes remained cautious. "You did what you said you would. That matters." It wasn't an open door, but no longer a closed one. Daniel sat alone in his house that night, staring at the quiet walls. For the first time in years, the emptiness didn't suffocate him. Because now, there was something beyond these walls. Something fragile. Something worth fighting for. And he knew with a certainty that startled him that he wasn't just helping Naomi and Angela anymore. They were helping him too, rebuilding pieces of himself he thought were lost forever. Winter settled in with biting winds and early sunsets, but the cold air seemed less sharp to Daniel now. Once defined by sterile silence, his life had begun to fill with warmth. He no longer spent his evenings wandering through empty rooms. Instead, his thoughts carried him toward a small apartment where laughter, homework, and quiet resilience lived. Angela still moved with guarded precision, never revealing too much, never letting her guard down for long. Yet Daniel noticed small shifts. When he stopped by the apartment, she didn't hover at the door anymore, ready to close it at the first excuse. Sometimes she even invited him in before he asked. Naomi remained the bright thread binding them together. Her energy filled every corner, her chatter smoothing over silences that might otherwise feel heavy. But beneath her joy, Daniel sensed the same hope he carried, that the three might someday fit together like pieces of a puzzle none had expected to find. The first real sign of trust came one evening when Angela returned late from her shift at the restaurant. She found Daniel at the table, with Naomi patiently helping her color in a science diagram for school. Angela looked around the room, at the half-empty cups of cocoa, the neat stack of books, and Naomi's relaxed smile. For a moment, she stood in the doorway watching. "You didn't have to stay this late," she said quietly. Daniel straightened. "I didn't mind." She wanted to finish her project. Angela crossed the room and gently ruffled her daughter's hair. "You should thank him, Naomi." "I already did," Naomi said proudly. "Twice." Daniel laughed softly. Angela's lips twitched with the beginning of a smile, but she quickly turned away to hang her coat. "Still thank you. It helps." It was the first time she had admitted aloud that his presence lightened her load. The days slipped by, and with them came gradual changes. Daniel noticed Angela listening when he spoke to Naomi about her dreams, worries, and goals. He saw how she sometimes leaned back in her chair and let herself rest while he carried the conversation. And he saw the weight in her eyes, relief mixed with fear. when she realized she was no longer carrying everything alone. But fear lingered. Angela's life had taught her that good things rarely lasted. Every step toward trust came with hesitation, as though she was waiting for the ground to fall beneath her feet. That fear came to a head one evening in December. The snow was falling heavily, blanketing the streets in white. Daniel had insisted on driving Naomi home from school to spare her the long, icy walk. Angela met them at the apartment, worry etched deep into her features. She said sharply that you didn't have to do that, brushing snow from Naomi's coat. It wasn't safe for her to walk. Daniel replied evenly. Angela's jaw tightened. I can take care of my daughter, Mr. Harrison. The words stung, not because of what she said, but because of what lay beneath the reminder that he was still an outsider, not hers to rely on. I know you can, Daniel said carefully. You already do. I want to help. Angela's eyes flashed with something between anger and exhaustion. Help always comes with strings. Maybe not at first, but eventually. People don't just give without expecting something in return. Sensing the tension, Naomi slipped quietly into her room, leaving them in the kitchen. Daniel's voice was calm but firm. I don't want anything back. Being here with you two, it's not charity. It's what I've been missing. Angela turned away, her shoulders rigid. I can't afford to believe that yet. He almost reached for her but stopped. Instead, he whispered, then let me prove it one day at a time. For days afterwards, the air between them was tense. Angela spoke little when Daniel stopped by. Naomi tried to fill the silence, but the strain was obvious. Daniel feared he had pushed too far, that the fragile bridge between them had cracked. Then, unexpectedly, the thaw came. On a Saturday morning, Angela knocked on Daniel's door. He opened it to find her standing with Naomi, both bundled in coats and scarves. Angela said, Naomi wants to go to the library. Her voice steady, but softer than before. Would you like to come? Daniel blinked, caught off guard. Of course. The three of them spent the morning wandering the aisles of books. Naomi eagerly stacked picture books, science texts, and novels she could barely lift. Angela watched from a distance, occasionally picking out something for herself. And Daniel felt for the first time like part of something larger than himself. Later that day, Angela spoke over cups of cocoa at a small cafe near the library. I don't let people in easily, she admitted. Not because I want to shut them out, but because they've left whenever I've trusted someone, or disappointed me, or worse. Daniel listened quietly, letting her set the pace. You're different. She continued, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. But that makes it harder, not easier. Because if I let you in, and you leave, her voice trailed off. I won't, Daniel said softly. Angela's eyes searched his, wary but yearning. You can't know that. You're right. I can't promise what tomorrow brings. But I can promise I'll keep showing up. Every day, until you believe me. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she gave the slightest nod, as though she'd allowed herself to crack the door open just a little wider. The following weeks proved his words. Daniel showed up not with grand gestures, but with consistency. He carried Naomi's backpack, listened to her stories, shared simple meals, and never offered money or gifts that might make Angela recoil. Instead, he gave time, patience, and presence. Slowly, Angela began to relax. She smiled more often, laughed at Naomi's jokes, and even teased Daniel once or twice. There were still walls, but they were no longer made of stone. One night after Naomi had gone to bed, Angela poured 2 cups of tea and set one in front of Daniel. You're still here, she said, almost to herself. Daniel smiled gently. I told you I would be. Angela looked down at her tea, then back at him. For the first time, her eyes held something beyond caution. something fragile but undeniable. "Maybe I'm starting to believe you," she whispered. Daniel walked home that night, through streets glistening with ice, the winter air sharp against his face. But inside, warmth spread through him like fire. The door had opened just a crack, but enough to let in light. And for the first time, he dared to believe it might stay open. By January, the fragile thread that had tied Daniel to Naomi and Angela had grown more substantial, woven from countless small moments. No single act defined it, but together, they formed a fabric that began to feel like family late-night study sessions at the kitchen table, shared laughter on bus rides, quiet cups of tea when the world outside was too heavy. Naomi thrived in the middle of it all. Her teachers praised her progress, saying her confidence had blossomed. She carried her joy like a banner, eager to share with anyone who would listen. "Mama, Mr. Daniel helped me finish my essay," she announced proudly one afternoon. "He even knows big words like metamorphosis." Angela chuckled at that, shaking her head, but she didn't hide the smile tugging at her lips. Daniel noticed every one of those smiles. Each one mattered more than the last. One evening after walking Naomi home, Daniel lingered as Angela prepared dinner. The apartment smelled of onions and garlic sizzling in a pan, a comforting aroma that filled the small kitchen. Naomi sat at the table cutting colored paper into shapes for a school project. "You don't have to stay," Angela said over her shoulder. "I know," Daniel replied, "but I'd like to." Angela turned her expression softer than usual. "Then set the table since you're here." It was the first time she'd given him a task like that, as if he belonged there. Daniel's chest tightened with quiet gratitude. He set out the plates and forks, carefully treating the simple act with the weight of ceremony. At dinner, Naomi chattered about her day, filling every silence. Daniel listened with amusement, but he caught Angela's gaze more than once. Something in her eyes hadn't been there before, less suspicion, more acceptance. Later that night, after Naomi had gone to bed, Angela surprised him by pouring 2 cups of tea and placing one in front of him. She sat across the table, resting her elbows on the wood. "You've been consistent," she said. Her tone measured. "I told you I would be," Daniel answered. "I know." She studied him, her eyes steady. "But consistency is easy at first. The real test is time." "Then give me time," he said quietly. "That's all I want." Angela exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath for months. "I'm still scared. If I let you in and you leave, it will hurt more than if I kept you out." Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady but gentle. "I've lost before. I know what it feels like to have someone ripped away. I would never do that to you, or to Naomi." Angela held his gaze for a long time. Then, for the first time since they'd met, she reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "I'm not promising forever," she said softly, "but I'm willing to try." Daniel's throat tightened. He covered her hand with his other one, holding it as though it were the most precious thing in the world. The weeks that followed were filled with cautious steps forward. Angela invited him to join them for Sunday dinner, something Naomi celebrated with uncontained joy. Daniel helped Naomi build a cardboard model for a school project, and when she proudly carried it to class, she introduced him to her teacher as "my friend, who helps me with big ideas." Angela let him push the cart at the grocery store while she compared prices. She teased, "You're making me feel spoiled," one evening, though her tone carried no edge. "Good," Daniel replied. For Valentine's Day, Naomi insisted they all make handmade cards for each other. Angela's card for Daniel was simple, almost shy. A red heart with the words, "Thank you for being here," written inside. Daniel tucked it into his wallet where it stayed. Still, challenges lingered. Angela's long hours left her exhausted, and Daniel sometimes caught her pushing him away out of habit. One evening after a tough day, she snapped when he offered to pick Naomi up from school. "I can handle it, Daniel. I've been handling it for years." Daniel stayed calm, though her words stung. "I know you can, but you don't have to do it alone anymore." Angela froze, realizing the truth in his words. After a long silence, she sighed. "I don't know how to let someone share the load. I've been carrying it by myself for so long." "Then let me learn with you," Daniel said softly. And slowly she did. By spring, what had once been tentative became a rhythm. Daniel no longer waited for invitations. His presence was expected. Naomi joked about him being part of the family, though Angela would roll her eyes and remind her daughter not to rush. But her eyes betrayed her. There was no real protest there anymore. The three sat in the park on a warm Saturday, where it had all begun. Naomi sprawled on the grass with a book, while Angela and Daniel sat on the same bench where he had once sat in grief and silence. Angela glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. Funny. How everything started with one question. Daniel smiled. "Can I sit here?" "Exactly." She shook her head in disbelief. The smallest question changed everything. Naomi looked up from her book, grinning. "See, I told you I was smart." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the park. That night, as Daniel walked home, he felt a certainty he hadn't dared admit before. They weren't just a part of his life anymore. They were his life. He had started this journey broken, convinced his story was over. But here he was, living a new chapter he hadn't known was possible. Not perfect, not without fear, but honest, grounded, and filled with love that grows slowly and lasts. Sometimes stories don't end with grand gestures or fairy tale endings. Sometimes they end with something quieter. A hand across a table, a place set at dinner, a laugh shared on a park bench. That's what makes them real. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what part resonated most. If you enjoyed following Daniel, Angela, and Naomi's journey, tap that like button. It helps more people find stories about hope, resilience, and chosen family. And if you'd like to see where their journey goes next, or read more stories with heart and depth, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss a single chapter. Because sometimes the smallest choices, like commenting, liking, or subscribing, can change everything, just like Naomi's question did.